Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a fascinating historical mystery. We're going to be looking at a story of wildly contrasting human behaviors, and it's all centered around one very specific, totally iconic sum of money. We're going to unpack exactly how a single currency payout ended up shaping history in some incredibly different ways.
And that number? It's 30. Specifically, 30 pieces of silver. Now, back then, this wasn't exactly some unimaginable lottery-winning fortune, but it was definitely significant. We're talking about roughly 3 months' worth of food for a typical first-century family. To put that into perspective for us today, it adjusts to somewhere around 100,000 to 150,000 new Taiwan dollars. So, a very solid, practical amount of cash.
Okay, let's dive into this because it's absolutely wild how this exact same amount of money dictated two entirely different historical destinies. On one hand, you have Mary's devotion. She had slowly saved up this precious nard, basically an incredibly expensive perfume, piece by piece since she was just a kid, all for her future dowry. And yet, she chooses to pour the whole shebang right onto the feet of her teacher, Jesus. Just an act of total, utter sacrifice. But then, conversely, look at Judas. For his betrayal, 30 pieces of silver wasn't a sacrifice at all. It was a bounty. It was the literal price he demanded to hand that exact same teacher over to the authorities. It is mind-blowing, right? Lifelong devotion on one side, ultimate betrayal on the other, both carrying the exact same price tag.
Which brings us to the price of betrayal, and honestly, the immense cultural weight of a kiss.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the deep cultural irony of how Judas actually executed this transaction. It's super striking when we look at ancient physical gestures. Think about it. In a lot of cultures, extending a hand for a handshake was really just a way to prove you weren't holding a weapon, right? It essentially says, hey, my hands are empty. But crucially, it keeps the other person at arm's length. But a traditional Middle Eastern kiss, that completely exposes the neck. It requires stepping entirely into someone's personal space. It demands this absolute ultimate level of physical trust and vulnerability.
And that leads us to a pretty chilling realization. Judas literally weaponized the ultimate cultural symbol of trust to pull off the ultimate betrayal. I mean, he took a symbol of absolute peace and intimacy and just turned it into a tool to sell out his teacher for that standard 30-piece rate. It's just a devastating piece of historical irony.
So, following that betrayal, we get into the crucifixion and a rapid, highly unexpected burial.
After the crucifixion, this incredibly stark contrast emerges. The very same crowds who were cheering Hosanna just days earlier, they completely vanish in terror of the Roman cross. And when even the loyal disciples flee out of fear of the authorities, these totally unexpected allies step up to the plate. We're talking about Joseph of Arimathea, a really well-connected, righteous council member who actively rejected the plot against Jesus, and Nicodemus, a highly respected senior Pharisee. These two major establishment figures boldly step out of the shadows to claim the body from Pilate. Joseph even provides his own unused premium family tomb. But here's the catch. They were racing against a terrifyingly strict clock. The timeline is crazy tight. The crucifixion began at 9 a.m., and death occurs by 3 p.m. But at 6 p.m. sharp, that's when the Sabbath kicks in, meaning absolutely zero work or burial preparations are allowed under Jewish law. Period. That left Joseph and Nicodemus with an intense, downright frantic 3-hour scramble. They had just 3 hours to secure the body, get it properly wrapped in linen, and finish the entire burial before that deadline hit. In this moment, timely action was literally everything.
And this whole scramble really brings us to our next major theme, the massive difference between raw price and true value.
So the crucial point is how we humans actually calculate worth. Stepping back from the historical timeline for a second, let's look at this famous moment where Jesus is watching people donate money. You've got these rich men throwing in, say, 5 to 10 silver pieces. Now that's a high price for sure, but it's just a tiny, negligible fraction of their overall wealth. But then a poor widow walks up and drops in just 2 small coins. The actual price? Incredibly low. But the value? The value is 100%. That was her entire livelihood. It's all about proportional sacrifice. And by extension, this is exactly why Mary sacrificing her entire dowry was recognized as an act of immeasurable value, even when her critics just saw 30 wasted pieces of silver.
And this idea of true value, it ties directly into another really profound concept from the text, the fact that love must be timely.
Basically, the value of an act of devotion is heavily dependent on when it's actually delivered. The texts make a huge point of emphasizing that Mary anointed Jesus before his death. She did it in preparation for his burial, yes, but crucially while he was still alive to receive it. Contrast that with the women who came later with spices after the crucifixion. They meant well, obviously, but they arrived too late to actually offer comfort to the living person.
And this brilliantly illustrates a concept that's perfectly captured by a classic, slightly humorous Taiwanese proverb. A peanut while alive is better than a pig's head when dead. I just love that. It's such a folksy yet deeply profound metaphor. The idea is that a tiny, super simple act of kindness, like handing someone a single peanut while they are still alive, infinitely outweighs a grand, expensive, but ultimately kind of useless gesture, like a ceremonial pig's head offered after they're already gone.
Which finally brings us to the lasting impact of these actions, or the power of remembrance.
When we look back at this entire historical record, we really have to ask ourselves, what actions actually stood the test of time here? Think about it. It wasn't the powerful political leaders. It wasn't the wealthy elites or those loud, fickle crowds that got remembered. No, it was Mary, a woman giving away her hard-earned dowry, whom Jesus explicitly declared would have her sacrifice remembered wherever the gospel was preached. And amazingly, it was a thief, a convicted criminal dying on a cross next to him, who simply showed a little faith in his final moments and asked for grace, saying, "Remember me." It is such a rich irony that these incredibly unlikely figures are the ones who secured their place in history, all through timely, genuine acts of devotion.
So all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative final question. Will your actions be remembered for their price or their true value? It really challenges us to take a hard look at our own lives. Are we constantly obsessing over the 30 pieces of silver, just the raw price of things? Or are we actively focused on delivering that timely love to the people around us right now while they are still here to receive it? Something to think about. See you next time.